curriculum is the most important aspect of an educational institution which is trying to teach courses. Right? UGC give guidelines on curriculum. If you're teaching in a law course, then the Bar Council of India gives guidelines on curriculum. If you're teaching in an architecture program, then the Architecture Council of India gives guidelines on curriculum. But these are all guidelines. Right? They're not written in stone. Thank you so much. They're not written in stone. There is a lot that is left to the faculty on how you want to develop and design a curriculum. Right? If it is not, that should not be the case. Faculty should have the freedom, the liberty to be able to think about the curriculum, whether it is political science, sociology, or law programs. You should have the freedom to think about your curriculum in the way you want to design. Right? Why is that? Because we don't want to create a system where we've created a rigidity around the teaching learning process. Right? Morning we spoke about dialogue, we spoke about how the process of teaching and learning is a dialogic process. But how do you initiate a dialogic process if your curriculum itself does not make room for that dialogic process? Right? Then you would become that kind of a program where you're giving notes. Right? Because your curriculum does not allow for, your curriculum does not create possibilities of the dialogue that you want to create for a teaching and learning process. See, there are two kinds of teachers. Right? One kind of teachers are doing a job. You look at your teaching profession as a job that you do. Right? So you come, you have a syllabus to finish, you have a presentation, you have your notes, you do it, and you get out. Right? And there is other kind of teachers who are thinking of this as a profession through which you are able to empower young minds, through which you are able to inspire young minds, and through which you are also able to inspire yourself. Right? And I'm assuming that all of us gathered here today fall in the latter category. Right? Two, we are often told that, research is a huge component of your academic life. You're supposed to do research, you're supposed to do publication. My experience tells me that I write best when I'm teaching, because I can put my ideas out there for my students to question and contest. Right? So I am able to, as Professor Buragohai said, I have administrative responsibilities. I'm Dean of Admissions and Outreach. I do a lot of other admin responsibilities in the university, and I have no institutional requirement to teach. My Vice Chancellor has written off my requirement to teach because I do a lot of work which gives me with very little time. So, as per institutional requirement, I don't have to teach. I choose to teach. And it puts a lot of burden on my otherwise very packed day, but I choose to teach because I feel that if I'm not teaching, I'm not thinking, reflecting, I'm not trying to innovate, I am not being challenged. Because nowhere will you be challenged like the way you are challenged in the classroom. And you must welcome that challenge. And you must be ready yourself to be able to deal with that challenge. And I feel that I write better. I am thinking more about my research only when I'm going into the classroom. But it keeps me sharp. Right? So it is not, we should stop looking at classroom as a space where we go give something. Classroom is also a space from where we take something. That's why it is called a teaching and learning process. It's not like you are doing the teaching and the students are learning. The learning is happening both ways, right? So therefore, we need to have a very, very clear understanding of why are we going into the classroom and what motivations in mind. That is one. Two, what does a curriculum essentially do, you think? What is your thought? What does a curriculum do?
Full design of the course.
Full design of the course, the structure of the course, the roadmap of the course, the reading list. There's a roadmap. How the course is going to progress. So if I pick up the syllabus for the paper on political thought, I need to understand what is it that I will gain out of this course. Right? Political thought courses, for example, my colleague here will tell you, is not just a bunch of philosophers that you will study. How does it build on each other? Who are contradicting each other? What are the continuities? And at the end of the day, what does this course do to me as a teacher and to you as a student? That is what a curriculum essentially does, right? So, curriculum is at the heart of the teaching and learning process in any education institution. So today we are going to delve a little bit deeper into thinking about curriculums. Now my first question to you is, what is the first thing that you think about when you think about a curriculum? So you are designing a curriculum. What are the courses you all are teaching broadly? I know political scientists are here. Who else? Geology. History. And? Literature. Business. Huh?
Design.
Business, design. Wow, wonderful. It was a very eclectic crowd. Okay. Oh wow, okay. Wonderful. Huh? Geography, history, physiotherapy, political science. So you have to see how what we are discussing today applies to your field. And if you feel something is not applying or how can I tweak it, we can have that conversation. Okay? Alright. So what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Whether it is physiotherapy, political science, geography, history, what is the first thing that you have to look at when you're designing a curriculum? Do you design your curriculum first of all?
Yes.
Fundamentals. What fundamentals?
Well, it depends. If I'm taking political thought, then I'll go back to the fundamentals of where does political thought start from.
Okay.
I cannot start liberalism without talking about the 15th century Europe.
Okay. So you want to look at the fundamentals. All right. What else? What else do you look at? Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. One is the fundamentals. What else? Let's keep talking. What else? So, my colleague here said that fundamentals. If I want to teach political, I can't teach liberalism just out of the blue. So, what are the fundamental thoughts that are there? I have to build on that. So, fundamentals. What else? It may apply to history also, sociology also, physiotherapy also, right? What else do you look at when you're designing a curriculum?
What exactly the students are going to learn from the outcome? The outcome basically.
Very good. I'll wait for it. So the second is the outcome, right? What exactly? Learning outcomes. What are learning outcomes? What exactly are the students going to learn, right, from the course that you are teaching? One of the learning outcomes could also be fundamentals. Right? It could be that at the end of this course, I want my students to learn the fundamentals of political theory, fundamentals of political thought. That could be for the first year. The second year, you may want to complicate this a little bit. You don't want to teach them fundamentals anymore. You assume that they have learned the fundamentals. Now, what would you want to teach them? So, one of the key aspects is to look at learning outcomes. How do you define learning outcomes? How do you do learning outcomes? How do you understand that this should be the learning outcomes for this course?
And how is it different from learning objectives?
Exactly. How do you define learning outcome?
Probably maybe for business, if we know about what are the industry requirements from the perspective of like studying a particular paper.
Alright. So you want to look at
The industry requirements.
industry requirement. Alright. What else?
See, again, it depends subject-wise. For example, we are from pol sci student. my learning outcome for a common topic at the undergraduate level might be a little different. And
Give me an example.
For example, let's say I'm talking about political thought coming back. We are talking about Western politics.
Is that your favorite paper?
No, I don't teach.
No, no, I'm just
I don't
kidding.
teach.
Ah.
Now, let's say we have a thinker called Jeremy Bentham. Now, let's say we are teaching Jeremy Bentham at both the UG as well as the PG level. Now, what would be my outcome after teaching the UG? All I want my students to have a basic understanding of who is Jeremy Bentham, what is his theory of utilitarianism. That is it. That would be my outcome if they can learn that. But at the master's level, things will become a little different. I would also like them to know who are the people who have criticized Jeremy Bentham and why. So it depends from a particular level to the other level.
Alright, two things. Again, I'm throwing it out there. Please feel free to not agree with me. As we said, dialogue. So that's a very good example. Let's start with Bentham and let's start with business studies who want to look at industry requirements. Right? I would argue that both whether you're teaching a business course, business administration course, family business, HR, entrepreneurship, whatever it is that you're teaching, or you're teaching a political science or a history or a sociology or a physiotherapy course, okay? What you want your students to know, the fundamentals, and you can keep complicating the fundamentals, could be one outcome. Industry requirement could be equally applicable to both a course in a business management kind of program or a social science, political science, history kind of program. What do I mean by that? We mean that the world that we, and that's why I think we need to keep rethinking and keep reflecting on our curriculums. Right? Why? The world that we live in is changing and shifting every day. The way we thought about curriculums 10 years back is very different from the way we need to think about curriculums today. Right? Today, we have 4-year undergrad programs now, NEP. You get a BA honors, a BBA honors, a BCom honors, only after you complete 4 years of undergraduation according to NEP. The top 5% of the class, depending on the university, you can decide top 10% of the class also, can get an honors with research. Those who get an honors with research can apply for a direct PhD. They do not have to do a master's. Those who have to do a master's may choose to do 1-year master program and then going for a PhD. NEP has done away with the requirement of an MPhil degree, which we had to do at some point. So, a lot of students that will come to you, again the context may be different, so tell me if it is not true in your case, but a lot of students who come to us, whether they are coming to do political science or they are coming to do physiotherapy, are looking to get into the industry after 4 years. You're spending more money to do this 4-year program, you're spending more time to do this 4-year program. So after this 4-year program, they want to know what kind of opportunities are available to them in the industry or the market so that there is, to use a business term, ROI, the return on investment. Right? So when you're thinking about your curriculum, and again, please understand, this is not one size fits all. It's not what I want to make true for my program may not be what you want to do for your curriculum. That's why you should have the flexibility to design your curriculum. However, it is possible to think about industry requirements both in case of business or physiotherapy or also in the case of political science and history. Right? What could be a possible industry requirement for a political science undergraduate students? What kind of industries do they get into? Right? They may decide to do UPSC. Even before doing a master's, they become an IS officer. So, you want them to have a more nuanced understandings of subjects, right? 2, They, for example, a lot of our political science students, some go on to do masters, but some also go on to join media houses, join think tanks, where they're required to write, they're required to write opinion pieces, they're required to think critically on certain subjects, right? So when we talk about, the requirements may be different. When we talk about an industry requirements for a business course, it may be different from when we think about industry requirement for a political science or a history or a sociology, but you have to think in terms of, that is a possible thing that you keep in mind when you're thinking about your outcomes. Your outcomes may grow, as my colleague said, from a first year to second year to third year to fourth year. You may build on what those possible outcomes are. Right? So a political thought 1 cannot have the same outcomes from a political thought 2. Right? But you have to think about a few things when you're thinking in terms of outcomes. And when you clearly lay out the outcomes, it becomes very easy to plan your course structure accordingly. Alright, so you've looked at one of the ways you're thinking about your curriculum design is that one aspect of it is to think about your outcomes. Right? How do you think about your outcomes? 1, in terms of fundamentals. What are the fundamental things that you want a student to learn after doing a particular program? 2, you might want to think about industry requirements. What are the other things you're looking at when you're thinking about outcomes?
It can be made interdisciplinary.
It can be made interdisciplinary. What does that mean?
Like for history, the students may have some knowledge of archaeology, geology. For history students.
Okay. So can you give me an example of any history paper where you have made it in? Tell me early papers, first year, second year.
First year, second year, we don't have interdisciplinary. It's all history core, but yes, in PG we have the historical archaeology. This is an interdisciplinary between history and archaeology. It is in third sem, not in the first and the second. It's not only in the third semester.
Understood. So, ma'am, I want to take out one idea from there and perhaps explore it a little bit. So you said when we do core, we are doing pure history courses, and then we have courses where we are dabbling with the idea of interdisciplinarity. Again, it may change from course to course, but courses that I have thought, I cannot make the distinction between that this is core and this is, for example, going back to Bentham's example. Jeremy Bentham is an utilitarian, right? What is utilitarianism? The greatest happiness of the greatest number. At the core of it, utilitarianism is about the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Over a period of time, one has critiqued utilitarianism and spoken about if the greatest number of this class finds happiness by standing up and walking out, do we allow that to happen, right? So, the idea of utilitarianism inherently comes with its own set of contradictions and challenges. So, even if you do not want to think about critiquing Bentham, like how the later liberals and others have critiqued, you will introduce this idea of whether utilitarianism works or not in your classroom. Otherwise, you cannot. Like if doing drugs give you happiness, should students do drugs? Because the maximum number of students are getting very happy doing drugs. Right? So this whole idea of utilitarianism, and is there an inherent fallacy in the idea of utilitarianism? And then of course, you have later political theorists like John Rawls, who reversed the idea of utilitarianism by said that it should be for the greatest benefit of the least advantaged. Right? Rawls said it is for the greatest benefit of the least advantaged. Now, it is a theoretical concept that inequality is permitted if it is for the greatest benefit of the least advantaged. But that's what our constitution does. It allows inequality when it is for the greatest benefit of the least advantaged. For example, Article 15 says no discrimination on the grounds of class, sex, gender it doesn't say, sex, so on and so forth. But Article 15.3 says there can be special provisions for socially and economically backward classes. 15.4 says there can be special provisions for women and children. So inequality is permitted, only it is for the greatest benefit of the least advantaged. Right? Therefore, you have taught the fundamentals, Bentham has said and gone. Bentham doesn't care about what the Indian Constitution says at present. But, right, you can take those ideas and you are able to think critically about what's happening in the world around you because you are able to apply those ideas, right? So one of the things that you would see if you look at industry requirements, whether it is history, ma'am, or political science or geography, is that the industry is looking for people who are able to do application of ideas. As we had discussed in the morning, AI is giving me all the information. If I today want to understand anything about anything, I just have to ask ChatGPT, right? But what the AI does not have is context awareness. What the AI does not have is able to tweak that idea, present an idea, and apply to that idea into real life situations. So when you're thinking about learning outcomes, you have to think in those terms. Therefore, perhaps, again, when you're designing your curriculum, whether it's a political science or a history curriculum, perhaps you do not want to think in terms of that in the core courses, I will do pure history, pure political science, pure sociology, and these are our interdisciplinary courses. Each course should have an interdisciplinary design and therefore followed by an interdisciplinary pedagogy. For example, I cannot teach political science, and I'm sure my colleague will attest to it and others who are teaching political science, if my students do not have an understanding of society. I cannot teach political science if my students do not have an understanding of how economy operates. Right? I always tell my students that one of the biggest economic shift that happened in the country today, demonetization, was a political decision. Right? So politics and economics are closely intertwined. So therefore, how can I teach, say I'm teaching political theory, for example, right? I'm teaching liberalism. I'm teaching Marxism, I'm teaching feminism. How do I teach it without our students having an understanding of politics and economics and society? Because all of these isms emerged as a response to something that was happening in society. Right? Like for instance, when we were debating with the idea of liberty, freedom, I'm talking concepts that may apply across programs, right? When you're talking about the idea of liberty or freedom, it was always tied to the idea of the market. So you may think that business administration has got nothing to do with politics, but it has everything to do with politics, right? You may think that the market has got nothing to do with psychology, but it has everything to do with psychology. Our behavior in the market is not rational. We go to the market, we see a Horlicks and we see a Mother's Horlicks. I pick up the Mother's Horlicks, the ingredients must be same. But I'm a mother and I think, oh, I need the Mother's Horlicks and I need something more in my body, some more nutrition. So the market for Horlicks has understood my behavioral pattern. So the advertisement is telling you that as a mother you're not eating, you're not getting your full nutrition. Go get the Mother's Horlick. The market is prying on our behavioral response. Therefore, this entire branch called behavioral economics. Right? So our disciplines, our programs, our courses are inherently interdisciplinarity. We do not have to make them interdisciplinary. We have to be conscious of the interdisciplinarity that lies within these disciplines. And once you're conscious of it and you know it is there, then your learning outcome could be making your students conscious of that interdisciplinarity that is there in a course. Right? Because often the students might think, but I am doing corporate law. I have got nothing to do with, behavior, and I have got nothing to do with politics, and I have got nothing to do with anything else. But every law is getting made by people who are sitting in the parliament. Who are people who are like you and me, right? And they're making laws based on information that is available to people like you and me. So once you get that understanding, then you made your curriculum design dynamic. Because you're not looking at your curriculum as being able to fulfill a very narrow goal of imparting one kind of fundamental knowledge, but you are also being able to tell your students how to understand this in the context of the world that you live in. And if you are able to do that, If you are able to create that context and make student excited about what's happening in and around you, you would see that there is a shift in the teaching and learning process. Right? Often students, I mean, I studied at Delhi University, and you know, those courses where it was taught in a way that we got excited and we got to apply and understand, that stayed with us, than those courses where we did not get an opportunity to do it. Right? You remember some kids will say, you know, I hated maths as a child. Most likely they hated the teacher. Because as a child you don't know whether you hate maths or not. But perhaps it was not taught in an imaginative way. Right? So it is often, again, I don't want to put the entire burden on teachers. There is also this false pressure on teachers where everything you have to do. You have to design also to make it interesting also, you have to stay inspired also, you have to wake up the sleepy ones also, and everything you have to do. There is also equally invested, students should be equally, because it's a teaching and learning process. But once you have a curriculum that clearly lays out the outcomes, then you also put a responsibility of learning on them. So that they can clearly see, okay, these were their outcomes. You do periodic reviews. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Are you there? Can you see yourself, you know, getting familiar with these outcomes? And if they're not, there is also burden on them. It is also their responsibility to seek out and be able to understand that they are on the same page as the curriculum design wants them to be. So, to summarize the first part of the conversation, one, curriculum of course is significant to the very process of teaching and learning. Two, that curriculum design is a very serious exercise. It should not be something that is handed down to you. The problem with many of our public institutions and some of our private institutions as well is that curriculums are just handed down for generations. You're teaching the same stuff that was taught 4 years, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line. It has to be a dynamic process. You should revise your curriculum every semester, right? And you should very clearly redefine the learning outcomes based on how the world around you is shifting and changing. So, learning outcomes. Learning outcomes is critically tied to understanding what is the needs of the class. So, curriculum design at the heart of it. First step, identifying the outcomes, learning outcomes. These are the outcomes that I want to see through this process, and then you assess the needs. How do you assess the needs? You look at industry requirements. Okay? You look at what is it that you want the students to learn. You look at past experiences. You talk to students. After you taught the course 1 year, you might want to change the learning outcomes for the next one because the students have given you feedback and you have accounted for those feedback. So it's not a static process, it's a dynamic process that must keep shifting and changing. And of course, you have also looked at certain core skills that you must want to or you may want to impart through a course. So whether it is physiotherapy, whether it is geography, whether it is political science or history, you might want a student to learn critical thinking. Right? You might want a student to learn problem solving. Critical thinking is not the same as criticizing. Right? Critical thinking is able to think and reflect on a particular concept that you have taught in the class. For example, again, because Bentham was coming back to Bentham, you can say utilitarian, say greatest happiness of the greatest number, and instead of going on to the next thing Bentham say, you can close the back book and say, okay, then what do they think about it? Do you think greatest benefit of the greatest number works? Right? And you had 5 students who raised their hand and said, no, I don't think it works because of this reason. I don't think it works because of this reason. And then you bring out 5 critiques of Bentham and you say, you know, you said exactly what this guy said. And the student immediately feels like a philosopher and said, oh, I said something that, you know, Rawls thought of. I said something that John Stuart Mill said. Oh, I said something that, you know. And then you start the process of building your conversations from there. So curriculum and having your, see, there has to be a lot of preparedness to teaching. and I feel that we don't talk about it enough in terms of that we need to be prepared to teach. My father is a professor of history in Sipsagar College, and he taught for 33 years, and he used to teach ancient history and Assam history and Mughal history. And the last day of his class, I remember, he was getting retired and he was studying in the morning. He used to always study 2, 3, 4 hours before he went into class. And I used to always make fun of him, saying, you know, history, it's done, why do you keep studying every time? It's happened so long back, you have everything, you should be able to just walk into a class and teach. And he used to spend 3 to 4 hours before a class every day for 33 years till the very last class. I saw him studying for 3 hours before he walked into class. So we need to give importance to preparedness. We have to be prepared, right? We have to be prepared to know what is it that we want to achieve in that 40 minutes. How long is your one class here? 1 hour. We have 2-hour classes. We used to have 3-hour classes. Now we have 2-hour classes. So we have to go absolutely prepared as to how we want those 2 hours to. Have you heard of this statement called carefully careless? Right? It is often referred to in the sense of fashion, like, you know, the nude makeup. Somebody's hair is falling, it's looking very careless, but effort has been taken to put the hair at that place so that it looks careless, but, you know. So the whole idea is you have to be carefully careless in planning a class. It should not look so designed that your students can feel that they feel rigid, that 10 minutes will do, 15 minutes will do, 5 minutes, not like that. But you have a broad lesson plan that at the end of his 2 hours, I want to achieve this. Right? And I want the students to, so you can come to the class and say that after these 2 hours class today, we would have reflected on A, B, C, D. Right? And the classes ended after 2 hours and you say, okay, let's summarize. That did we reflect on these A, B, C, D? Why was it that we could not reach C? That point was not discussed. Where did we detour? And then perhaps in the next class we will pick up from C. So we have to pay, the way we pay attention to curriculum design, we have to pay attention to class design, lesson plan design, as to what are we going to do. By lesson plan I don't mean notes or PPT. I mean what is it that you want the learning outcome for that day to be. Right, like today when I came in to have this conversation with you, I know that by the time we end this conversation, I want us to have talked about curriculum design, learning outcomes, how to identify learning outcomes, what is needs assessment, what are the various ways that we can measure whether the learning outcomes have been achieved or not. Right? I know that these are the 4 or 5 things we should have talked as a group if we want to have a conversation around curriculum design. Okay. Third important thing when you're designing the curriculum, you have to look at your learning outcomes, you have to look at whether you are rooting it in interdisciplinarity, whether you have looked at industry standards, whatever industry that may be. The next point that you should look at is what is the composition of your class. It should be an inclusive, how do you make the classroom space and inclusive space. There is diversity in the classroom, right? So in this conversation, you have people from political science, you have people from history and geography and physiotherapy and law and all kinds of disciplines seated together. So if I come in and I tell you how to design a political science curriculum, it will only appeal to probably one person, right? So you have to understand what is the composition of your class. By composition of the class, you should have a clear-cut understanding of where are the students from, how many male students, how many female students, who are talking in the class, what kind of examples do you want to give, right? All of us belong to the Northeast. For the longest time, we spoke about how Northeast was ignored in NCERT. You remember? We had this whole battle. I remember when I reached Delhi University, I studied in this college called Miranda House. I went for my undergrad. I was doing political science from Miranda, and it was my first year. And they do something called it's like a glorified ragging. They call it introductory phase. So you have to go and they call you and say, fresher, where are you from? And tell me your name. And there's like a whole bragging thing happens. You have to stand like this. You cannot look up to your seniors. There's a whole drama around it. But anyways, I went and somebody asked me, where are you from, freshers? I said, I'm from Assam. And without meaning to, and this was 90s, without meaning to hurt my sentiments, I'm sure, they launched into a conversation about, oh, she's from Assam, but she looks like an Indian now. And I was not sure what I was supposed to look like. But that's the first time I realized that there is complete lack of understanding about Assam Northeast. Things have changed over a period of time, not as bad as before. But representation matters. What I understood when I went to Delhi, that representation matters, that my identity matters. I want to be heard. That till that time I did not think of myself as an Assamese. In the sense that that was not a conscious thought, oh, I'm Assamese and different from others. But that became a conscious thought when I reached there. So you do not become conscious of certain identities that you carry unless and until it is called into question or not paid attention to. Same thing in your classroom. Right? You have people from all kinds of background now. You have people from all kinds of socio-economic backgrounds, gender, ethnicity coming. So are you making them feel included about the conversation in the classroom? Are you giving examples? What later NCERT, there was a huge project. What NCERT started doing to include, because NCERT is one of the biggest critique was that NCERT history stopped in Delhi Sultanate. And then there was nothing about Assam history, or there's nothing about Northeast history. There's very little about history in the South. Apart from Chola dynasty, nobody spoke about anything. So one tried to consciously bring in these ideas. So that, you know what NCERT started doing? While giving examples, right? So you say, na, ke, Rita lived in, whatever, Lucknow. From Lucknow she went. So they started giving example. Rita lived in Imphal. From Imphal, if you have to go to Dimapur. So you make people familiarize with examples that they can identify with. We have to be very conscious of that in the classroom, and it should be part of your curriculum design. Your curriculum should be flexible to account for the diversity in the classroom. To give examples, to think about material that people from all kinds of background can relate to. For example, you would have a student in the classroom, as my colleague said in the morning, who had used AI, who's, have access to these kind of resources and come prepared. You may have another student who have difficulty in understanding English and is not being able to follow a word you are saying because you are predominantly speaking in English. Right? So how do you strike a balance between the two? So you have to think about your curriculum design in a way that you're accounting for diversity. It should not come as a surprise to you in the classroom, or that the classroom is diverse. It has to be diverse. It should be diverse. But how do you then make that diversity a strength instead of making that diversity a weakness? So you have to be able to account for that. You have to, as a teacher, for example, when you're identifying your reading material, that's what I do. When I'm identifying the reading material, I identify reading material of different stages. Say, for example, I'm teaching international relations, right? So I can ask a student to read Morgenthau, or I can ask a student to read an excerpt of somebody who has written something on Morgenthau in a much more simplified form. So you have to decide what is it that you want to introduce in the classroom at what point. Right? Or some people are able to engage with a particular text, but few students are not being able to engage with that text. Right? And for that, you should be able to give material. So you should be prepared that you have multiplicity of material that people from different levels can engage. For that, you also need time. It does not happen if you're teaching 10 hours a day. You have to have time to be able to, these things do not happen if you do not have the time to think about it. And we have also, Professor Burago and I also have been talking about how do you, that's an institutional call, how do they want to distribute responsibilities of teaching so that you have time to figure out how. But this is important to the teaching and learning process. You also have to evaluate the role that technology will play in this. Like for instance, you might want to use PPTs, you might want to use videos. I always found, because we do 2-hour classes, that showing short burst videos on something that is relevant has helped the class. Because it wakes up everybody, you see something visually, and then you get back into doing that. But you have to also spend time engaging with that material. For political science, for example, Professor Michael Sandel has all of these very interesting talks on YouTube, which are short burst talks. You can pick it out and you can show them. But also, you have to see who has access to what kind of resources. You cannot come into the classroom and say, oh, please go read Romila Thapar. And you know that your library doesn't have Romila Thapar's book. There is no access to Romila Thapar in the... So you cannot put something as a material in your syllabus when you know your students do not have access to it. Right? So there is a lot of thinking. And trust me, if you put in that thought at the curriculum design stage, your life in the classroom becomes much more easier. Because you've thought all of this already through. Right? So you have to also have an understanding of, I will suggest that the student should read something, but is it available in the library? If not, do you want to make a request to the library to procure that, or in the meantime come up with certain material that the students will have access to? So, these are the few things that you want to keep in mind when you are planning your curriculum. But one of the big thing about having all of this is that how do you know that what you have planned, the learning outcomes that you have planned, they are being delivered in the way that you have imagined, right? You thought, okay, these are my learning outcomes, but how do you know in the classroom they are achieving your learning outcomes? So you have to be smart in laying down your learning outcomes. Again, the learning outcomes may be very, very different from course to course, but you have to be smart. What does smart mean? Your learning outcomes have to be specific, they should be measurable, they should be achievable, they should be relevant, and they should be time-bound. What does that mean? It means that when you're setting your learning outcomes, don't set learning outcomes like, by the end of the course, the student will have some understanding of how, tectonic plates shift. I don't know what happens in geography, but something like that. It has to be something which is going to be measurable, has to be specific, which has to be achievable, which has to be relevant, and which has to be time-bound. Right? So, for example, one specific outcome could be that by the end of the course, you will know the fundamentals of political thought, right? And for that, you need to be able to identify what are the fundamentals of political thought. Otherwise, what do you test? Right? So, you should know the key political thinkers, how their thoughts have evolved. Anyways, you can decide what those fundamentals are, right? So, it has to be specific, right? By the end of this course, you should be able to apply utilitarianism to some modern day problems, right? By the end of this course, you should be able to display an ability to think critically, right? By the end of this course, you should be able to apply what you've learned in the classroom in the context of a problem that will be given to you, right? And it has to be time specific by the end of this course. It's not like read this at some point, you will achieve something. It cannot be. It has to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Why? Because your learning outcomes are directly connected to your evaluation and assessment. Right? If your learning outcomes are not clear, you don't know what the hell is happening in your course. If your learning outcomes are not specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time bound, how do you evaluate? What do you test the students on? Right? For example, you want your learning outcome specific. I want you to know the fundamentals of the course. At the end of 2 months, I will do a quiz to check if you understand the fundamentals of the course. So your learning outcomes is tied to your evaluation and assessment. Are you able to critically reflect? By the end of the course, I will give you an article, and can you reflect on that article by applying the principles of utilitarianism? Right? So your assessment and evaluation, I know that here you do both internal and external assessments. So you and we do it a bit differently. I believe yours is 30-70. You do 30% internal assessment and 70% external. Ours is, for core courses it is 50-50. It has to be 50% internal assessment and 50% external. For electives it is 70-30. 70% internal and 30% external. Alright, so we do 70-30. So there is a lot of in-class continuous assessments that we do. So the assessment process happens in a very very flexible, and it is completely up to the faculty how they want to design their internal assessments. There is no role that any academic board or anything plays. It's my choice how I want to do my internal assessments. But largely the idea is that you should be able to measure your learning outcomes through your evaluation and assessment process. Now, assessment and evaluation process. So when we say, one more thing I want to say, that you want to have a specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time-bound learning outcomes, your learning outcomes should also have a logical sequence. So it cannot be that your first learning outcome is critical thinking and last learning outcome is fundamental. You have to know the fundamentals to be able to do critical thinking, right? So you have to also build your learning outcomes. Your learning outcomes of the first years will be different from the learning outcome in the second and the third year of the program. So the learning outcomes will also have to be built logically, one after the other. And again, you would have to create a sort of roadmap for the learners, that this is how you've come to study geography first semester. These are the things that you've learned. It's not the courses you have done. These are the things you have learned in the first semester. These are the things that you have learned in the second semester. You build up on that in the second and the third semester, and by the time they're graduating, what are the set of skills that they have in order to go into the industry or for higher education with that. That roadmap should be very clearly laid down, is what I'm trying to say. And that can happen through continuous assessments. Again, as I said, the contemporary world is shifting and changing. So you have to also constantly keep reviewing your curriculum. For example, we have a curriculum review board that reviews our curriculum every semester. So if I teach this course this semester, the next semester I also have to submit the curriculum again. I might want to change the readings. Probably an interesting article came out only towards the end of this semester, which is essential to the course that I'm teaching. I will incorporate it in the next semester. For that, I might want to get rid of another reading. Right? So I have to keep my reading list also dynamic. Right? You also have to see, when you're deciding your reading list, who is it that you're teaching? Right? So for example, for the longest time in Delhi University, when Western political thought was taught, right? We started with the Greek political philosophers, then we did the Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau kind of political philosophy that Rousseau and others had done. Right? So what you teach is also very, very important. Right? Whom do you teach in terms of political philosophy? But what are the reading material that you are using? Right? For the longest time you could see that we have taught political science or history or geography primarily European or North American authors. You're not reading Indian authors. You're not reading, for example, Assamese authors who have probably written in English. So how do you know that you have, obviously the students are alienated. Why do they want to know Aristotle is said it and gone? Right? How is it context that I am a part of. So how you decide what to teach, what material to teach is also very, very important. Right? You can teach an entire course on political theory without teaching Partha Chatterjee. You can teach an entire course on political theory without teaching Uma Chakravarti. But teaching Uma Chakravarti and Partha Chatterjee is important because they will be able to align with what they are talking about, the Indian political scenario. So what you teach, often, for the longest time, how syllabus bibliography is decided, okay, acha, this book, put it there. Okay, let's do this or to. No, you have to think. Who are you teaching? Whom will you teach first? For example, if I am teaching political thought, then I'll first teach Rousseau and then introduce Mary Wollstonecraft. Because I want them to understand where the critique came from. Right? I'll first teach probably John Stuart Mill and then introduce Simone de Beauvoir. Right? So you have to think about who do you want to teach and how you want to teach, where you want to precept and what material are you using to teach. For the longest time we've taught knowledge that was produced only in the context of the West. What about post-colonial knowledge? But what about knowledge that got produced in our context? Right? So that is very, very important. Right? So that is something I want you to keep in mind. Coming to the idea of evaluation and assessment. See, there are two ways in which broadly evaluation and assessment happens. One is a formative assessment and other is a summative assessment. What is a formative assessment? Any idea? Huh? Formative assessment. Continuous. Formative assessment is continuous. Formative assessment is low stakes. It could be a 5-mark quiz. Right? It could be class. Everything in formative assessment does not necessarily have to attach to marks. Okay? It could be class participation. Right? What does formative assessment do? What formative assessment does is that it keeps telling you whether the class is with you. Whether you are achieving your learning outcomes. Right? Whether some of the students in class are with you but the others are not. Right? Do you need to introduce any new reading? Do you need to stop and re-look at something? That's what formative assessment essentially does. Formative assessment is essentially low stakes, but it gives you continuous feedback. So there should be inherent flexibility and adaptability in your curriculum so that you can shift and change. Done? Summative assessment is something that is to test whether the students have been able to get the learning outcomes or not. So summative assessment could be in the form of an end-term examination or a research paper that the student is writing or a capstone project that the student is doing. Right? All of this form within the framework of summative assessment. Summative assessment is high stakes. There's no time to review now. Right? It's just assigning marks. Ideally, either you should have your formative and summative 50-50 or you should have more stakes for formative because there is possibility of correction. If you have summative, then you need to give enough time to the students to figure out that there are, because at the end of the day, your classroom should be a space where more and more students are able to clear that level and go to the next level. The idea of a classroom should not be that, students are not being able to answer, respond, pass the paper, right? You should make it a process where it is possible for them. Not because, if they don't know anything, they pass, that's not what I'm saying. But empower them in such a way that they are able to, it should be a facilitating process. It should not be a process that stops them. Yes. So based on all of the evaluation and assessment that you've given, all of that should become part of your curriculum design. So what should your curriculum essentially have? I'll tell you what our curriculums have, but what should you essentially have? You have an introduction to the curriculum. The introduction to the curriculum should say what is it that you're trying to do in that curriculum. Right? That this course is on I don't know, European history. And in this course, we will look at European history from this time period to this time period. Okay? And this is what the course wants you to learn, right? This is what is the larger objective of the course, that you are supposed to appreciate and engage with European history. You can take the learnings from European history and apply it to understandings of contemporary times. You can draw parallels between European history and, colonial history, post-colonial history, Indian history, so on and so forth. So this is the broad introduction of the course. The second thing you should clearly lay out is that these are the learning outcomes of the course. At the end of this course, you will learn A, B, C, D. Those learning outcomes should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time. Okay? You may want to make a distinction between things they will learn and skills that they will acquire. Okay? Depending on the course that you're saying. You can say that, okay, at the end of the course you will learn A, B, C, D, or at the end of the course you will be able to think critically. You will learn the skill of critical thinking. You will learn the skill of presentation and communication. So if that is one of your deliverables as an outcome, that I want students to be able to communicate effectively at the end of this course, then a big part of your assessment could also be class presentations that students give. Right? Because through presenting, the students are able to clearly speak, you will ask counter questions. So your outcomes and your assessment are very closely tied together. Okay? So you put together your learning outcomes, you talk about what all they will do in that course, and after you put together your learning outcomes, you talk clearly about your evaluation. That you will be evaluated on A, B, C, D criteria. There will be a class participation. There is going to be this, there is going to be this. At the end of the day, you're supposed to do this, and based on that, you will be evaluated. Right? In our university, we started a practice where in the curriculum, we have a safe space pledge. All students and the faculty will have to take that pledge, meaning that you discuss all kinds of things in the classroom. Something may be triggering to somebody. I teach a course on gender and conflict, right? I'm discussing violence, I'm sometimes discussing things which may trigger somebody, which may be uncomfortable, right? So we take a pledge that, we keep the classroom space safe, right? Suppose you're teaching a psychology course and you're teaching any other course and the students have shared something intimate in the classroom. Then the student should have the confidence that it stays within the classroom. They're both, the students, colleagues and the teacher are not going to go out of the classroom and say, "Arey, tumhe pata hai, Purvi jo hai us class, uske sath ye ho gaya tha." So then the students have the confidence to speak freely, that you will not be judged, that you may say the wrong thing. Right? For example, when I said the students, when they stood up and said, "But I'll be very uncomfortable if my girlfriend, wife earns more than you." Right? The student should feel safe to give an opinion that may be the unpopular opinion. Because you're otherwise not engaging with an opinion that, so you're just pandering to the majority. Right? So to have that idea of safe space. We also have a disability support clause in our curriculum, where we tell them that if you are suffering from any learning disability, if you have a physical disability, there's a disability support committee, it is highly confidential, and you can go and register yourself. Because students sometimes don't want to talk about their disability. Some students have, say, attention disorders or learning disabilities, and they might find it difficult to talk about it in the class. So this is also part of the idea of flexibility and idea of adaptability. Because so that you give them a room, that come and meet me separately and talk about some challenge, any learning challenge that we will account for it. Right? So to create, and then you should have a list of your readings, module wise. I believe your all courses are divided into 4 units. So each unit, each section you should have that these are the 3 readings that you do. I also see, if it is possible, have a list of recommended readings. That if you have time, if you want to know more, you can do these readings. Try and keep the reading eclectic. It is possible if for example, if I am teaching the history of partition, for example, right? You can teach it through the textbook, and you have to engage the textbook. But what if they go and read Sadat Hasan Manto story. Right? A Manto story will teach you partition the way no other story can. So what if we read a Sadat Hasan Manto story together? And then come and discuss what is your understanding of partition through that story. You know, I remember when I read Rohindra Mystery's book, what is the name of the book? On the emergency, 75 to 77, right? It's a fiction, right? But it was prescribed to us in the class to read this because it's happening at the backdrop of the partition, of the emergency. So, is there anything that you can introduce in the class that will keep the interest of the students going? It doesn't always have to be a textbook, right? Can they go and watch something? You know, can you introduce a movie? Can you introduce a documentary? Can you do something different that will deliver on your learning outcomes but keep the conversation in the classroom interesting and eclectic? Is it possible to do that? Right? For example, when I teach second wave of feminism, I ask them to watch Mona Lisa Smile. It's a Julia Roberts film, but it tells you about how the second wave of feminism happened, how it came about. You're teaching World War II history, you might want them to watch Schindler's List. You know, so the material that we engage with in the classroom does not have to be the written material. Okay. Doesn't have to be the written material of the textbook. No, don't worry, I'll pick it up later, please, ma'am, please. Does not have to be the written material of the classroom, right? So can you think of things to watch, things to read, a story to do, that sort of, you know, you're teaching, you know, anything on the Assam history, or you're talking about, you know, the struggles that Assam has undergone post Ohamandan and all of that. You might say, oh, forget about everything, let's read a novel that talks about it in the same way. Or you can do a very theoretical class, but at the end of the day ask them to review a novel or review a Manto story. So how do we want to engage with the material? What kind of material that we want to give them to engage with? All of those things make a huge difference. I remember when I used to teach the Marxist concept of alienation. I used to always show in class the first few minutes of Charles Chaplin's Modern Times. Because the first few minutes of Modern Times is the biggest and most beautifully way that alienation could be. And it's funny and everyone's laughing, but they're getting it. They're getting it, what is this alienation that one is talking about. So if you could think of ways in which you can engage with the material in new ways, in imaginative ways, I think we should do that.
I think most of my colleagues would agree. We have very less amount of time, like our university being a very new one, so we are handed over with a lot of administrative responsibilities, and along with that the teaching part is there. So how do we devote the time, like how do you suggest us to devote time to make the class interesting?
As to how much time is to be given to faculty so that they can pursue the goal of teaching in its true spirit. That is one. Two, perhaps, you know, as faculty, you will have to figure out how many courses do you teach in a semester?
Courses, for me it is BBA and MBA, 2 courses. Say MBA we have around 7 to 8 papers, and BBA.
You teach
For me, the load is, for me it is around 14 papers, 3 maximum.
You teach?
For me, for my level, for others it could range from 4 also. Maximum sometimes it goes to 5.
So if you teach 3 papers, how many hours do you teach per day? Or in a week, how many hours do you teach?
Per week it could be 14. Say basically depends on the credit.
14 hours a week.
For me, what is associate is 14.
That's a lot of hours to teach.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't want to create a revolution here, but that is a lot of hours to teach. As I said, I mean, we are having that conversation, and I want to really have this conversation with the institution as well. That is a lot of hours to teach. And one has to, you know, you can't be so fatigued that you've left, you know, you can't be joyful and playful, but you also need to be not fatigued. So that is a big challenge, and I cannot answer the question because but just by my saying the hours will not come down. But that is a conversation I'm willing to have, that perhaps one has to rethink the hours that you're teaching, because that's a lot of hours to teach and keep the light alive. That's not easy. But at the same time, I think institutionally there should be some time given to faculty before the beginning of each session, where you are not doing anything else but thinking about your curriculums, and we can talk about that.
That is very much needed.
Yeah, I think that is very much needed.
And ma'am, on this like post-COVID, I think we rarely have got such kind of a semester break because it's like continuous. One session is ending, then the exams are also staggered. So basically, if you have to speak about last semester,
Post-COVID money, post-COVID का time हो गया. You've not
but then
had
ma'am,
semester.
I think exam person is also here. But
Exam
I am not representing exam now. I am just
But then,
representing
ma'am,
for-
like it has not been still integrated. Like the PG first semester courses are still run later, and their exams are also not happening
So you've
together.
not getting a break.
Not a single day.
Again, I can take it with me, and I can talk to the exam persons and other institution people that, see, if you ask me, I would highly advise against or advocate against doing this. I think as faculty, if you are, see, that is the fundamental job that we do in education institutions, which is to teach. And to teach is not merely, and to answer Professor Rollock's question, the teach is not merely to deliver on a particular set of things that you, boxes that you tick. You know, I finished this, I finished this. It's a process through which you inspire, you mold, you're also shaping, people's lives and futures. And it needs to be given the time and respect it deserves in terms of giving you time to develop programs and curriculums. Because these are all interconnected, right? For example, I'm an admissions and outreach team. So I understand that students are not feeling inspired in the classroom. If that emphasis is not given by faculty, I wouldn't be able to bring in the next batch of students. The reason I'm able to bring in the next batch of students is because there are systems and processes in place whereby the students who have come in, they feel fulfilled in the context of the programs that they're doing. So perhaps as a community also and as institutions, and we need to understand that these processes are interconnected. Often what institutions feel is that, but this has got nothing to do with my students coming in, and they're probably pumping in other resources to bring in students, where they don't realize is that this is a key reason why students would want to come. So it's a question of, see, today's conversation is of course about the merits of curriculum and curriculum design and how to think about it as an independent exercise, and with an understanding that you would have the time and the flexibility to be able to do that. If you do not have the time and flexibility to be able to do that, perhaps it is also a good point from where this can be communicated and this conversation can happen. But on your end, you will also have to perhaps figure out what are the ways you can keep the flame going for your own sake. Because I'm sure you are also in the classroom for reasons other than just finishing a 50-minute class. To be able to figure that out is an important thing. And I understand, I hear you. I don't have the power to change that, but I can place it that this is something that perhaps needs to be rethought in terms of how you want to plan faculty time so that they can do what at the core of it they have to do in the way that it is supposed to be. I hope that addresses something of what you asked. What else? Yes, please.
Regarding this assessment, actually this attainment of course objective or outcomes, we set our question paper. The trouble is that many faculty members, they are not setting the question paper on the basis of course outcome, and many of them also don't have an understanding how to set a question paper on the basis of outcome. That's a real challenge.
Absolutely. So for example, see, at the end of the day, what you test a student on has to be based on what you wanted to impart at the first place. So what you test a student on, and and what you want the outcome of the class conversation should be cannot be different from each other. What you test the student on could be different. You might want to test their cognitive knowledge. So what have they been able to understand in terms of theory or thought or anything. You might want to test their affective knowledge, their emotional intelligence, their ability to apply something to a particular situation. And you might want to test their skills that they have acquired. But then that is something that you should have imparted during the class. You cannot test a student on something. Like, for example, I cannot go out and now set a question paper for you after this conversation, okay, and tell you to write, I don't know, the 5 pillars on which geography is built. I don't know, because I am not talking. That's not the discussion. So I have to assess you on something that we have discussed in the class and is part of the learning outcome. So assessment and learning outcomes are very deeply tied together. If I can be very candid with you, I think the current structure of question papers leave very little for imaginative possibilities. Because what I have seen is that you have 8 questions for 2 marks each. Leaves very little for imaginative possibilities. How do you ask an imaginative question?
Well, that's a very difficult to answer because see, I have also come from, we all have come from different universities. We have not seen questions of this level at the university
Exactly.
structure. We don't have 2 marks question. And
Yes,
the point
science
is,
is also
I have also, some others have also raised this issue, but we have a very dogmatic kind of people who are running the system. They don't want to listen. Straightforward.
This is something that we are recommending as part of our mandate. The
2 marks question at the master's level.
Yeah.
What are we doing actually?
No, I agree. I want to understand what are you doing. This doesn't work.
Actually, it is different for different subjects.
And then you should have the flexibility to make it different for different
Exactly.
subjects.
Because flexibility should be there, we all agree to that. Because for us, 2 marks questions or multiple choice questions are important.
Yeah.
Rather than the long answer type.
Fair enough.
Because long answer type, if I give a long answer for 7 marks, it is not justifiable at all. Because one question, if you give 20 or 25 marks also for some topics, with all the diagrams and illustrations and the leveling and all those describing of it, even I don't think one whole paper, 3 hours is a justifiable thing.
Absolutely, ma'am. I get your point, and I think, but each course is different.
And
And
there should
that
be the
flexibility should be left with those who are designing the course
Exactly.
and delivering the course.
Yes.
I'll give you an example. I looked at your the question pattern. I'm coming to you in 30 seconds. I looked at your examination pattern. So you have, say, from unit 1, you have to ask 2 questions. As away with the possible of interdisciplinarity. At the end of the day, if your first political thinker you taught, say, is Gandhi, and the last political thinker you taught is Bentham, you might want to ask a question where the student is able to bring in Gandhi and Bentham together. But when you are restricted to asking one question from one unit, then the possibility of interdisciplinarity or interdisciplinary learning will come. I understand that challenge and we'll be recommending that. And again, I understand now what you're saying, that there may be some courses where you want to test based on that itself, and that is absolutely fine. The beauty of doing what we do in the system of higher education is that we can throw out that rule book and be able to imagine doing this in ways that is suitable to what we want to teach, how we want to teach it, and what we want those learning outcomes to be. That does not mean that it's an anarchy. कि जो आया क्लास में मर्जी पढ़ाया, जो मन किया पूछ लेंगे, end में ऐसा भी नहीं. That's why you have academic review boards. That's why you have curriculum review boards. You have academic review boards. Get your curriculum reviewed by your peers. It has to be a process. And then, then it is floated to the students. It has to be a process. So I understand. That is a challenge, and we've also spoken about it. A challenge that cannot be addressed by one individual wanting to change it. It has to be an institutional level change, and we've recognized it. And as part of our mentorship, we are recommending that that be changed with immediate effect. We can only hope that it will be taken up immediately. But that is something that we truly, truly recognize. What else? Yes, sorry, ma'am.
Yeah, that's the same thing what ma'am was telling. Like, it should be core the requirements are different. Like for us, for example, for the health science, what is the standard universities follows? That 50% passing in theory and practical separately. That is the practice. But here we are passing mark itself, it is out of 70, 21 the student has to pass. So already we are keeping it very low.
Which is already very rigid structures. See, we cannot talk about flexibility and adaptability of the structures
It should be
themselves.
generalized, it should be course specific.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. That's the way it should be.
And
That's
masters,
absolutely
there
the
should
way it
not be any options. We never used to have any options in the master's question paper. It was all compulsory paper.
That
So
also
here, once they go out, I don't know how they are going to take, because they will face challenges like this.
No, these are very important points, and this needs to be immediately.
No ma'am, actually
rethought.
it is design of this course curriculum that belongs to BOS, and if BOS
What is
believes
BOS?
that Board of Studies.
Board of Studies.
So the BOS actually will instruct the university that our course curriculum is like this. So because whatever you are saying, everything is there already in the syllabus. The trouble is only that is assessment. And other thing, there is no trouble. The thing is that this BOS, they have to recommend that our this particular course, like evaluation of this course should be like this.
And what is the BOS composed of? Who are these
Composed of
people?
external academic expert, industrial expert, and their HOD, dean's level.
So the faculty have no say in what they want to do?
Yes, they have. They have to recommend it. And from exams point of view, so then I already informed you that we collect a scheme of evaluation. The scheme of evaluation is given by the actually department. And the scheme of evaluation basically based on course curriculum. And course curriculum is designed like this, 70-30 will be this. But from this BOS, this should be raised first. That it is a particular course where the evaluation should be not 70-30, it should be 50-50. So
No,
this will solve the issue.
I get it. And we will certainly recommend it.
No
Sorry,
proposal we have received, such proposal.
Yeah, we will certainly, we've already recommended it and we've very strongly advocated for it. And I'm sure with people like you and all of you who have strongly feel about it, this will get done. But that does not change that at the heart of it, that curriculum design is something that in which we are the key stakeholders. As faculty, we are the key stakeholders in the process of curriculum. Because at the end of the day, it is in our hand how that will be delivered in the context of the classroom, including the flexibility and adaptability and including having measurable and special. This structure is very, very important. I strongly believe that curriculum design is at the heart of how you want to dictate the rest of the semester will flow and go. And we have to be conscious of how we want to build in interdisciplinarity. We have to be conscious of how do we want to bring in a praxis-based learning. We have to be conscious about how we want to account for diversity and different learning contexts. All of that we have to be conscious of in order to build that curriculum to the best extent possible so that the teaching learning process that follows happens in a seamless manner. Of course there will be challenges even after that. Of course you would plan it in a certain way in the classroom. I often feel that no two classes go similar, because the energy of the class is different, the way and teaching can be only that much strategized. I feel that teaching, and I don't know if you will agree, to a large extent is also a very intuitive process, right? It is intuitive. You respond to what you get. You respond to the questions you get. You respond to the kind of energies you get. So you have to also have enough flexibility built into it that your intuitive just does not go away. Right? The things that you do instinctively does not go away. So it has to be, I have to go away.
No, it's all right. Carry on.
So it is that kind of a process where all of that needs to be able to build in together. Any other question? I just want to quickly have a look if I missed out anything.
Ma'am,
Anji.
like you told, there are two types of teachers, and I came across both types of teachers here. The problem is when we allow designing the whole curriculum, obviously it has to be done by the faculty. But how to address if a faculty makes it below the standard we put for the department?
Curriculum review boards. You cannot have, you have to have, so there are two things that happen. One is your BOS or say BCI or a UGC that gives a set of guidelines on what the curriculum must include, right? For example, I cannot imagine designing a political thought curriculum without say including ideas of Locke, just to give you an example. So a guideline is there that this particular syllabus should at least teach A, B, C, D. There is a broad guideline and then you sort of build on it. A, that should be there. 2, once you submit a curriculum to your academic board, to your academic committee of the school, your academic office, there should be a review of that curriculum to make sure that it matches the kind of standard that you want to uphold for your institution, for your department and so on and so forth. It should not be a process where the faculty has decided and has gone ahead and taught whatever the faculty thought was appropriate to be taught. There has to be a review process through which this is done. So there can be peer review, there could be a board review, there's a subject experts who come in to review that, but there has to be a review process.
Moreover, we have feedback collection also.
There's something very interesting, you know.
Huh?
After only weighted.
Yes.
No, it's not like that. Actually, the review part is the Board of Studies has the responsibility to review course curriculum.
Okay.
Contents are developed by the concerned
Fair enough.
faculty member.
That is all right.
place
I'm not talking
okay.
about content. I'm saying somebody has to review that content.
Yes, we
But if
have.
the content that I think is the best content, you know,
Review
when
mechanism.
peers review it or others
Yes.
look at it, may say
Yeah.
is not, for example, you have certain standards you said about your department that you want to pitch your programs here and it may not live up to the larger vision that program has. So it has to be reviewed. Sorry, you were saying.
See, I was saying in general, see, when we talk about framing of question papers and the content of the curriculum, see, we also have to understand that we are all aware of is that RGU is just a 5-year-old university and the quality of the students that come to this institute is not as same as some other places. So we also have to keep that in mind at times. At times, you know, I tell my teachers when I moderate questions and I see beforehand, I tell them nonsense because half of them will not understand. And I know that. If you look at my intake, there are huge number of students who comes, but their level of understanding is very different. And here the problem lies. I cannot set
Can
a
I
question.
respond to that? No, you finish your
And I cannot set a question because when I set a question, I have to think about the students also, whether they will be able to attempt it.
Yeah, respond now. That's the only thing you must do. When you set a question, you have to think whether the students are going to be able to answer it. It is absolutely important. And whether you are at RGU or at JGU, the quality will vary. There could be 10 students who are excellent, there will be 5 who will be average, there will be 4 who will be below average. And the percentage may vary depending on the space that you're in. So absolutely, that's the only, and that's why we're talking about flexibility. When you make things rigid, when you say it is compulsory for you to answer 5 questions, I don't have a choice. So if I am not that quote unquote good a student who's able to understand, I don't have a choice to choose from something which will perhaps is the question that I am able to answer. Right? So you ask a question on, please write 2 paragraphs on Bentham's idea on utilitarianism. I am an average, below average student, I have read Bentham, I can chapo 2 paragraphs. I will attempt that question. You ask another question, please compare and contrast Bentham's idea of utilitarianism with that of John Stuart Mill. I am an above average student, I have understood, I have applied myself, I want to answer that question. You may want to mark people accordingly. You may want to say, oh, okay, this person has taken a daring challenge and gone for the question which was harder to answer. Let me, even if it is not a very beautifully articulated thing, I will give 2 marks more for trying to attempt something which was tough to attempt. But you still have something in the question paper that somebody who just got the basic understanding is able to answer. I completely. And therefore, the idea of flexibility is important. Therefore, when you have a flexible, and therefore, I mean, you do not have it currently, but if you have more internal assessments, then you can have internal assessments tweaked according to the ability of students on how. You can give them a choice, either submit a research paper or just present it in class. And I just want to understand whether you have understood the key concepts or not. And if the student is able to articulate, you mark accordingly. So it gives you, that's a formative assessment, it gives you the possibility of account for people, strengths and weaknesses. So you and I are on the same page when we say that a question paper should reflect on possibility, the question paper should not be an elimination process. Question paper should be a process of whereby majority of the students are able to respond to what you're asking. But the question paper should also be a reflection on what your learning outcomes are. So the learning outcome could be an understanding of bedtime and critical reflection. Somebody has understood, you evaluate based on that. Somebody is able to do more better critical reflection, you evaluate based on that. But at the heart of it then lies the flexibility to be able to do that, is what we are saying. So you and I are on the same page when we say that quality will differ and that you may have to ask questions where you make sure that a critical threshold is able to answer it, but for that you need flexibility. You need not rigidity that from unit 1 you have to ask questions. If unit 1 is the toughest section unit, give them a choice. Do from unit 1, if not then do for unit 2, 3, answer 3 from the below. You have to be able to do that depending on how you think your class has been able to. Right? Okay, what else?
We'll call it a day.
We are calling it a day.
Otherwise the tea is getting cold.
Okay, I just want to say a few concluding final 2-3 points. First of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so very much for engaging with this conversation. Curriculum design is a conversation that is very close to my heart because I feel that it lies at the heart of the entire experience of teaching and learning in education institutions. For the longest time, we've not paid enough attention to the idea of curriculum design, and that we design curriculum always for the students. I think we have to start also thinking about that we are designing curriculum for the self. Because if the students are being with that curriculum for one semester, so are we going to be with that curriculum for that semester, for that year. So it is something that should excite us, should help us innovate, should help us be flexible and adaptable enough that we are able to take at least the majority of the class with us. The key pillars of curriculum design is that you have to map it to your learning outcomes. Your learning outcomes will have to be measurable, they have to be specific, they have to be relevant, they have to be achievable and time-bound. And your outcomes and those achievable outcomes should be something that you should be able to test in your processes of evaluation. And that you have to keep the curriculum, not you have to is direction, I'm not trying to say. Try to think about keeping the curriculum flexible, dynamic, keep the readings interesting, have the possibility of the changing readings so that you can respond to different kinds of classrooms. So if somebody has, as I said, been able to understand partition by reading a well-argued journal paper on the partition, you can give somebody a Manto story to read where they would get an understanding of partition. The idea is that does it serve your learning outcome or not? And then think about your assessment in a way that you are able to evaluate that learning outcome, build in enough flexibility, and you should be able to do it. I know that we as a community of educators have a lot of other pressures on ourselves. Teaching multiple courses, we're doing administration, we have responsibilities of family, there's so many things that we are doing. But at the end of the day, it is on us to decide that how do we want to spend that 1 hour, 2 hours within the classroom, and how do you want the end result of that experience to be. And I would really urge that try and tie up your research to the extent possible with what you teach in the classroom. It really makes it a very exciting process. If you're writing something, researching on something, and related to that something you brought in and you're discussing in the class, it makes your life more exciting. And if you are excited, I promise you the students will be excited too. So thank you very much. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to all of you. I look forward to meeting all of you tomorrow. Thanks, Sachin. Okay,
Two
please.
things by way of clarification. About the necessity and importance of reviewing the curriculum that you frame in the Board of Studies. I think we are going to suggest, recalling very strongly, our ordinance, this university also has a provision for what we call as the school board. The school boards are not operational. And if it is operational, some kind of ambiguity, redundancy is there between Board of Studies and school board. Now, school board has got a very, very clear-cut statutory role to do. They will guide, they will discuss, review, and give direction to the course curriculum and research, which is not happening. So, if that is in place, every school has a school board, from Board of Studies after discussion, debate, it will go for further destination and all. And they will review. Then these kind of issues will not arise. Now secondly, and the flexibility will be of course there. And we operate as far as setting of questions are concerned here, we are operating within very rigid framework. The flexibility I think is not there at all. Now even then, what I would suggest is this. The question paper is, as we say time and again, that is to facilitate through, but without diluting the whole process of teaching learning. So in that case, there is a standard rule of thumb. At least 2%, 3% of the question papers, should be very tough. These are for the above average students. Large percentage of the questions should be such, designed, framed in such a manner that large majority of the students can handle it, respond to it. And a few percentage of the students of the questions should be such that it is really below the average students. They can adapt. So I think if you remember this, whether you have flexibility or no flexibility, I think it will address the issues of this.
Yes.
You understand my point?
Yes, yes. It is
All
achievable.
students are not equal.
Yes,
2% of the students will be above average. Set some tough questions for them. Let them attempt that. You will figure out who is what. Large majority will be average. Set questions for them accordingly. And some questions will be definitely for the backbenches. So I think this is the way it is. We have done it like this all our life.
Sure, that is also one plus point in our question papers, that in every question, if it is for answer any 2 out of the 3, there is always a option for optional. Like Joseph, for every question there is an option apart from the 2 marks question that is compulsory. This is there, but not subject
What
wise.
is the total size of the
The percentage we have to decide.
The total mark is 2 marks. How can you assess the knowledge level of whole unit by setting 2 questions?
That
The
the
problem
percentage
in
is
setting
not.
the question comes practically is this, that we don't have creativity to show in the alternate batches.
Yeah,
Like when you restrict it from unit 1, it happens that we are just trying
That's
to
what we
repeat
discussed
the
at
same
the
questions again and
And
again.
let us see what happens. This exercise is a part of the mentoring process, and let us see how much amenable we are. Thank you very much. We meet again tomorrow morning.